Kia ora. So this report seeks your endorsement of the infrastructure investment required to support the full development plan for Drury. Auckland Council has been engaged in planning work for the urbanisation of Drury for over a decade now, including identification in the first Auckland plan, zoning as future urban in the unitary plan, and a structure plan which was completed in 2019. Through the development of the last 10-year budget, the Council identified a key issue as being the demand for infrastructure to support growth. Acknowledging that capacity to support growth is limited, the Council made a decision then to prioritise its resources and focus on a few key locations. One of these was Drury. So this report brings together work that the Council Group has undertaken over a number of years with central government to identify the infrastructure needed to support the Drury-Opahiki area and ensure that it develops into a well-functioning urban environment. The investment program that we recommend is endorsed is focused on the transport network, the provision of parks and open space, and a multi-purpose facility. So the proposed transport investment is based on a planned transport network developed by the Strategic Growth Alliance. This is focused around public and active transport to enable a less car-dependent community. Huge amount of work has been done with our central government partners to identify the right projects and then to project the cost of these as accurately as possible. The investment in parks and community infrastructure is based on our open space provision policy and on the Community Facilities Network Plan. So the projected cost of the total program for council investment is $2.3 billion over the next 3 decades. So the presenter from Kiwi Property this morning raised a number of questions around our cost calculations and project details. We are confident in the work included in both this report and the following one. It is the result of extensive reviews, including some updates from the numbers that we used in consultation to get more accuracy. So one item that was mentioned was around the table attached to this report. There was a copy and paste error moving from Excel into Word in one cell. The totals in the attachment are correct and the numbers in the report are correct. I have a corrected version of the table here and we'll provide that to Sandra so that it can be attached to the minutes and we don't have that minor error. So endorsing this program now will provide increased clarity around Council's intentions for investment. It will also support the alignment of funding sources with the cost drivers and the beneficiaries of the investment. The capital program will continue to be reviewed every 3 years as part of the 10-year budget and the infrastructure strategy work, and this will enable the program and its timing to be adjusted to reflect any new and the latest information. So thank you and open for questions.
Councillor Turner.
I just want to say that it is unsettling for myself when I try to navigate and work my way through these documents to find that there's simple addition areas and things like that. It doesn't give confidence. It was the same in the consultation document for the budget, and I understand what you're saying, and there was mathematical just adding problems in there, and so I understand what you're saying, and I'll go back and look through it all. But when we have the big talk like we had the other day, Andrew, and then I find the adding's wrong, it's not good.
Thank you.
What was the question? You were asking him to do better.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's implicit that we have defendable numbers, and that was raised this morning by one of the related parties, and who confirmed they do support long-term planning, but they do want the numbers to be defendable, and I think so do you. So that's fair enough.
That's correct. It's unfortunate error.
I'm sure they've been made by many. Yesterday I accidentally called one of my councillors a politician, so we can all make mistakes. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Peter, Michael, and Andrew. Hey, just in terms of the motion, your recommendation, I think it is C. C, endorse the 30-year program, goes on, subject to available funding. So that's the important part for me. So that would be subject to confirming a development contributions policy, subject to possibly Waka Kotahi funding, subject to possibly government injection, and a range of other things. Can you just expand on that? Because it is important that it is definitely subject to all of that. I just want to make sure, so you can instill me with some confidence that we're making it very clear that this investment program, the long-term investment program, one, it does not proceed unless it is fully funded. And I'm not even sure whether available funding is right. Should it be fully funded? But I'll let you, I don't want to wordsmith it. I'll let you respond on that one. And under the D, then the C then goes on to incorporate the D. Is there anything else that we should be capturing there, or have we encompassed all those other things that we've got to test it through under the D? Just want to be sure there, because this is quite a big call.
So you're quite right, and I think you've identified pretty much all of the key funding sources that we need to ensure available, primarily the contributions, the Waka Kotahi funding, and of course other council funding for what will be required. I think that the capture in the second one, particularly of the long-term plan, it will be the long-term plan where the funding of specific projects will come to a point that does incorporate many other pieces, particularly it's the work we do within the long-term plan to align with regional land transport plans, the incorporation of the infrastructure strategy within there. So I think you're right, that's the key area where that funding work is done in the long-term plan. And I think in the Part D captures that. And then the long-term plan, of course, will inform things such as a development contributions policy.
Okay, thank you. And just lastly, I guess we've got development in many other parts of Auckland calling upon capital and operational expenditure. So this doesn't preclude our testing of all the others as well, does it? This is not giving, the South a jump over everything else.
No, it's not. So this, in the last long-term plan, the council did make a call to focus on the 4 investment priority areas. Those areas were chosen because they're areas we're working with central government particularly. They were Drury, the Northwest, the AHP areas and the CRL areas. And that is a council position that those will be the priorities. Through the next long-term plan, the opportunity is presented to the council to revise that prioritisation and potentially to add further areas if funding allows for that.
Good question, thank you. And in defence of the South, Councillor Baker.
I thought you might be looking at me. Thanks, fellas. Just in regards to C, and picking up on what Chris has said, I'm actually really uncomfortable with this, and I'm uncomfortable. We've heard today from the developers, and they were very explicit as to what their issues were, and you're asking us in C to accept an attachment that we actually haven't seen. We've got one because the one that is part of the agenda is incorrect. That's where the mistake was made. Is that right?
Yeah, there's just one incorrect number. The numbers at the bottom are correct, the totals, and it's just one line item.
My preference is but that's more of a statement. But what is the risk in deferring it to make sure? Because this is Drury is the guinea pig for how we go about some of these huge areas. And so, in my view, it is something that we have to get absolutely right first time round. We shouldn't rely on potentially going to court to have someone else say to us, well, hey, you should have done this and you should have done this. I would prefer to make a decision based on absolutely squeaky, trustworthy information that might result in exactly the same result that we're seeking today. But I'm really uncomfortable going ahead today, and I know that there's been a huge amount of work and this has been going on and it's been out to consultation. However, I think we have an obligation to make a really well-informed decision. We haven't seen attachment A that we've been asked, whilst it might have the same figure at the end, still has a whole lot of projects in there that potentially aren't there. So, yeah, I'm getting into statement territory.
So I think the question was around a deferral, so I'm happy to have a response to that. I mean, the starting point for me is around what development contributions are, and I always have to bring myself back because they look like a revenue, but they're just a partial cost recovery, and it's an apportionment method between developers and ratepayers. So I always bring myself back to that starting point. I would say that staff do not recommend a deferral. You may recall that this matter was previously deferred to undertake further work in response to issues raised in consultation by developers. And since then, a huge amount of work has been done by staff to develop these projects and identify costings. There's been extensive and intensive consultation. Wealth of information has been provided. Within the report, you can see paragraph 7, 59 to 64 and 88 include that formal review process and the external reviewers that we've had on board to look at this. Further work has included engagement with central government about their plans, the Strategic Growth Alliance that Michael talked to, worked with AT and council departments as well. And where appropriate, we've sought external peer review to test our approach. We are comfortable that the project list and costings are fair and accurate, irrespective of a cut and paste error on one line in the attachment A. And if there are errors, we will fix them. That is one of the commitments that we have, and we review this thing every 3 years. We have had significant engagement with developers through the consultation and separately. However, I think it's fair to say that the financial incentives don't necessarily align between developers and other default funders being ratepayers. The exact approach suggested by the developer today was attempted in 2020, and having spent some time discussing with the developers, the Crown and Council agreed that such an approach was infeasible. So it would be relitigating that infeasible approach that already has been tried. As I'm getting to the end here, the decision rights to decide on the share of growth paid by ratepayers or developers is for elected members or for Crown rather than a mitigated process. And as more information on costs becomes available, development contributions are adjusted, and that happens every 3 years. We talk about 30, but it's a 3-year rolling 30. If we were to defer, this would result in lost revenue, as the consents would continue to be issued under the existing policy for an amount that does not reflect the long-term costs of providing this infrastructure that is necessary because of the growth. And at some point, we would need to consult again, given the delay between feedback and decision making, and we've already gone through that process intensively twice. Any deferral would further delay the extension of the approach to the other areas that we need to get on with and would have a financial cost to council. And finally, if further work than what we have completed is required, and we consider it adequate, as you can see set out in the paper, it does beg the question of what standard is required to adopt further changes to the policy. We are comfortable that the standard we have reached in here is adequate for the purposes. So quite a long-winded approach, but I think it covers quite a lot of concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
I note in the report that the development contributions don't cover stormwater. Given the proximity of this development to the floodplain and the high likelihood that that floodplain will be revisited very shortly, and much of the development could be within a new floodplain, is it not appropriate to deal with this issue now, because we could be looking at an order of magnitude of costs that are significant in respect of development contributions.
So what we're seeking today is endorsement of an investment program for transport and community infrastructure. You're right that we have not included the stormwater infrastructure as yet. Work does continue with developers around the stormwater requirements in the area. Yes, there is a significant floodplain in the area. There is none of the structure plan, none of the plan changes that have been through project any development to occur within that floodplain. So work is continuing on the stormwater needs, and as they become crystallised, they will come back to you, and that's why we're not ready to bring those to you as yet. And as they are ready, we will.
Okay, so you're familiar with the fact that all of these areas amount to a single floodplain effectively, because one catchment flows into another. So the concern that I raise again, given that the development is predicated on being able to build, should we not deal with this issue first? Because obviously transport and all of these other infrastructure costs follow on from the base consideration of development in a floodplain or not. And I have a real concern at this point that this is not being adequately factored in. And I say that because there was a 1 in 50 flood in 1966 that took out the motorway bridge. There was a flood in 1988 that was equally significant. If anything, most of the issues that go to flooding in this area, let alone climate change and the fact that the whole basis of this is around 2015 IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change figures that are way out of date, and the development within the catchment has exacerbated that. So I'm just asking a question around the significance of this particular issue in this area, particularly given our recent concerns to do with storm events and not allowing developments where you've got habitable floor areas that are going to be impacted. And this is a 160 square kilometre catchment. It's not small. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. This is undoubtedly a very pressing issue, and we have colleagues obviously working away hard on reviewing our storm preparedness and reviewing floodplains, etc. The planning for this area has been completed. The area has been live zoned and development is happening now. What we are proposing in this paper does not deal with planning issues, consenting issues. This paper is about ensuring that there is appropriate infrastructure to ensure that when that development does happen, we can support that development with good infrastructure, with a good transport network and good community facilities. So I appreciate your point about planning and the flooding issues, but this paper is around development that is happening and how do we best support that development.
Good response, thank you. Good question. Councillors Dalton, Fletcher and Newman, and then I'm going to go to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the confirmation that the information was correct, Michael. But it just seems such a variance. So the examples that Kiwi Property gave, those two examples, like those are the cost increases in 4 months. That's so, yeah, can you explain it? Thank you.
I'll pass that to Andrew as the detail on those items.
Oops. They're not in cost increases in 4 months. They were referring to items in the documents. So that was one of them was an unescalated cost from the detailed business case, and consultation had it at 110 million, and it's now moved to 120 million. Now some of the projects costs have come down, So that was, we've looked at the issues that were raised in development, raised in consultation, and gone through all the projects, looked at it very carefully. And so there have been some movements, and quite a chunk of that was in response to the feedback we'd received. And the other projects in a similar situation, where we'd done further work to ensure that we were getting the right costs in there, so that we could come back to you with that material updated. So we're confident that those things are reasonably addressed in there. So some of the projects have come down. So, for example, they didn't, our estimates of the costs of the important arterial road that will have to go through Slippery Creek, that's come down materially through the additional work that we've done, much of it in response to issues that were raised in consultation. So that's been a good, helpful process for us.
So the presentation where it says no explanation why they've increased over 4 months is not accurate. It's not a fair representation.
And we've got all the information that allows those questions to be asked, and that you'll also see we've set out in quite a lot of detail the process that we use to establish the costs, and that's set out in the methodology for calculating DCs for Drury document. Now, I know that's rather complicated, but it does set out the approach that we've taken. And the other reports you'll see talk through some of the issues we've taken, the issues that were raised by developers, particularly around the costing and how we've worked through in response to those.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And may I ask my questions in the context of understanding and accepting the need for investment in infrastructure and recovery? So I also understand the financial situation of the council right now. So in no way do I wish for my comments to be interpreted otherwise. But I'm not going to refer to specifics because I realise that this potentially has litigation into the future. So I don't want to get into detail. But I do really have concerns that in rolling this out that will impact on other areas, Mangawhau and so forth, into the future, the model has to be robust. We have to have the assurance that the integrity of the data, that the methodology that we're seeking to apply here is utterly waterproof. And, you know, I'm taken back 6 years or more and hearing when we had the very same conversation around the targeted rate on accommodation, something I actually supported, but when I asked the questions about whether we would end up in court and was the model robust and would all of these things, I was, my thoughts on that were pushed aside. And all I want is the assurance that you can put your hand on your heart and say to us that this is sufficiently robust, that this council will not be compromised in terms of protracted legal proceedings, in costs and reputational damage going forward. So have you, Mr. Gudsell, considered whether or not there should have been further contestable policy advice given to councillors on this matter?
Thank you, Councillor, and I appreciate the context in which you've answered the question as well and the way in which you framed it. I await with interest the Supreme Court decision on APTR with very great interest, so that will put that one to bed. In terms of the comfort around the process we've gone through, the detail that we have, I believe it's a very defendable position. We have dotted the I's, we've crossed the T's, we've had the external review. I mentioned the paragraphs within the report that talk to the process that we've gone through. The reason for being so detailed in the report about the process that we've gone through is so that you can have comfort in that process. I cannot
bind other parties in terms of choices they may make around legal proceedings, as we are generally a responder to legal proceedings rather than an instigator of them, particularly in this case. And the degree of financial incentive that rests in other areas may mean that we do face legal action. Knowing that as a potential outcome, albeit an unpleasant and unwarranted one, has also encouraged us to ensure that we are as accurate and precise as we can be around the methodology we've used and the answers we've got to.
In the case of Kiwi Property, have there been any informal conversations that have been undertaken with those parties? I mean, from my perspective, Kiwi Properties have actually been a responsible developer. In fact, they funded the first rail station at Sylvia Park, privately funded rail station. They understand the importance of infrastructural investment, and there have been good working relationships within the past. So can you give us the assurance that there has been sufficient dialogue with these parties before councillors take a decision today?
Yes, we can confirm that the council, across the council group, supported by the Development Program Office, have been engaging with developers over a number of years, both through the formal consultation processes, but also informally through other meetings and correspondence. So there has been work over a number of years with the developers in this area, including Kiwi Property.
I won't delay things further, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman, and then Councillor Lee. Then I'm going to go to that, and for all good boys, we might do one more item after this before lunch, because the next one's similar. Okay.
Thank you. My question actually goes back to I want to press you more on the timing for the work on the stormwater assessment that Councillor Walker had raised, because arguably it's just as or potentially more expensive to address stormwater attenuation in this catchment than it is to address the scope of the transport. And I would like to have more insight into when will that work be done, and when are we going to conclude that assessment, because I expect that we will need to do a variation to this policy that will probably see a figure that will make this figure in terms of the Huey contributions look very modest. And it is important that is done, because this catchment flooded with the anniversary weekend floods and what have you, and there are other catchments nearby which are smaller but equally flood prone, and the costs that we know in those catchments are significant. This will be even more of a challenge. I want to support this, but I want to know when we would expect a subsequent report back on the stormwater costs.
Okay, so we are continuing that work. The nature of it obviously is complicated. The stormwater planning is quite specific, site specific. That will continue, but what we are saying is important is that in the meantime we endorse this program and continue to endorse the transport and the community program while the work continues for stormwater. There are, as we've said, development is in place, development is happening. As was identified this morning, there are already 6,000 resource consents lodged. As they continue to be lodged, the development is progressing, and we think it's important that we plan a network that supports that ongoing development.
Sorry, part of this is in my ward, and you're not telling me anything I don't know, and I agree that we should do that and provide for it.
And it's live.
And there have been plan changes lodged, and we have been submitters on that, and stormwater has been part of the evidence. So I know that work is ongoing. It needs to land. It needs to land with some urgency so that we can charge a HUI contribution for stormwater. Is this a 12-month job, a 24-month job? When is this going to happen? Because you are right, as the applications for resource consent continue to be lodged, based on the smaller number, we are not picking up the contributions necessary to fund the stormwater attenuation in a very low, flood-prone, wet catchment. And I would very much like some advice on that.
While we're calling in an expert, paragraph 48 and 49 talks to some of this detail. So far, what we're seeing of the 8 approved plan changes in Duri-Opaheki, development activities are not proposed in the floodplain, and any further development will be subject to the unitary plan rules. As we know, under 49, the stormwater infrastructure requirements are highly dependent on the specific location and form of development, and this next bit's important, and are largely delivered directly by developers. So council investment occurs where there's that coordination between developers or where that large-scale infrastructure is needed. That becomes clearer as those consents are lodged and the specifics are understood. And under 50, you can see that assessments and engagement with developers continues. So we're adequate at this point. As things develop and as that changes, that's when that stormwater needs to raise above the individual level. Respectfully,
Through you, Chair, just because a development takes place outside of a floodplain doesn't mean that there doesn't create a stormwater risk, because stormwater is subject to gravity. And stormwater continues to flood from high locations to low points in the catchment, hence the urgency. It doesn't matter precisely where you develop in the catchment, it all feeds into a catchment that is a poor recipient for stormwater, given that it is very prone to flooding. So there is real urgency here. John Dunshay, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, the timing I've been given for the stormwater work would be 15, 14 months. And the reason for that is, as I'm sure you're aware, and many of the other councillors are aware, is the fact that the nature of the stormwater works depends on the nature of the actual development that takes place. So as we're working through the development and the resource consents with the developers, the Healthy Waters team will get a better understanding of the nature of the water flows, and that will enable them to understand what is required, the cost of that work, and that will give us a better understanding of additional funding that might be required and to be paid through development contributions. That's why that work hasn't been able to be done now, and that's the way we would normally do it going forward. We would do it as the development took place. We worked with the developers to understand those flows. If I can also respond in terms of the wider issue about the development, we've talked about the amount of development that is already consented. We've talked about the plan changes that have taken place. But in terms of the Duri-Opaheki development, there's about 2,000 hectares in that area. Most of it's not subject to planning. When we did the Duri-Opaheki structure plan, floodplains were kept free of urban development. The existing township does sit within a historic floodplain, and councillors in the area will be aware of that. But notwithstanding the development that will take place in the area will not worsen any of the flooding in that Drury town centre. The Slippery Creek floodplain, which is a significant floodplain, is not proposed to be developed. The overall current stormwater modelling, therefore, suggests that the Opaheki structure plan area is appropriate for development, and that is the work that was done as part of the structure plan and with Healthy Waters. It will not exacerbate the current flood risk in the already developed areas of Drury, and that development is not proposed in floodplain land.
Well,
I've got Mike Lee. Everyone else has had a crack. We've been talking about this for months. I think there's other meetings.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just a little bit concerned about, given the scale of this development, whether we have whether we're skilled enough in the technical side of it to control procurement costs. I'm looking at, you know, eye-watering figures here, and given the serious concerns made at this meeting this morning by Kiwi Property, I would like to go over some of those concerns again, the amount to charges really. So I would just like to, the first point that is a real concern is made in public: multiple requests for information, no quality response from staff. Is that true or not?
No, that's not true. We've responded to all of the inquiries that have been made, and the volume of information and the level of detail provided to support consultation exceeds anything we've done before, as you can see from the materials in front of you on your agenda today, and the extensive materials that were provided to support the consultation, which were also available to all the councillors.
Okay, I think the key word is quality, and obviously Kiwi Property is not satisfied, and obviously I'm not going to make any comment on that. The other issue of concern is that the project costs increased by $500 million since November 2022. Is that right?
No.
Not right, okay. And in the report here, we talk about transport as a key element. There's the obvious concerns about the implications of the costs and the effectiveness of stormwater plans in a floodplain. But coming back to transport, Jesmond Road upgrade has gone up 19 million to 120 million. That's over 600%. Is that right?
Now, I think I spoke to that one earlier. The costs has got, if I'll just check I've got the right one there. So Jesmond Road, is that 42C or 68?
It's 42C.
It's 42C. Yeah. So at consultation, that was $110 million, and after, that's one of the projects where the additional work we undertook, taking into account feedback from consultation, led to it going up to 120 million, which is less than 10%. Now, as I said earlier, some of the projects have actually come down in price, and some of them materially, in response to the additional work we've done.
So, okay, so you were saying that the starting figure of 19 million is, you disagree with that?
Yes.
Okay, and the cycleway to Drury West, 40 million to 110 million, nearly 300%.
Which one's that there? Is that 68?
Yeah.
So that's gone from 59 to 110 through the consultation process.
Through the what process?
Well, we've done further analysis. So
Analysis?
Yes, further analysis of the materials that we had available and that went out to consultation. There were issues raised in the consultation asking us to look at a range of matters, and we did that. And this project, in reviewing it, we've determined that it will actually cost ratepayers more, and therefore we've put the more appropriate higher value in. However, there are also a number of projects where the prices have come down materially, and as a result, the overall transport cost that we're now looking at is lower.
Thank you.
Councillor Turner's promised a very short one.
Can we, if I've don't vote for C, will it allow it to go through still? And the answer would decide me whether I don't vote or whether I abstain. Because that's where the mistake was made in the agenda.
So as we've noted earlier, the mistake on the agenda was a copy and paste issue. It's one number. We have a corrected copy of the table available, and we're just working to see if we can get that up on the screen so that you can see it. If you don't vote for item C, if item C were not to pass, then neither would item D, and neither would the following report on the agenda. So the following report on the agenda would have to be withheld. So,
Don't worry, I mean, it's a typical thing that when you post something, you try and find the tiniest error in something or other in the phone book and badmouth the whole thing over that. It's natural that one side's going to dislike this.
I understand that,
and the
Mr.
other
Mayor,
side
but
don't.
this is not just one thing. And, you know, I am out of my depth here technically, and so I rely on making a decision on my faith in what I'm being given. And I understand this is a big, complex machine, but so's an aeroplane. And when I step on that, I expect every single thing to be right. And so, you know, I'm being asked to take off here without confidence. Thank you.
so if you'd like me to just talk through the issue.
Think of it as the airplane food, which is always wrong, and the plight still gets you there.
Can we just scroll to the bottom? Here we are. So that last item there, the last individual row for reserve development, which reads 220 million, 220.7 million. That had an incorrect figure pasted in there, had a figure of 7 million. But as you'll see, if we scroll down a little bit further, it was showing the correct number for reserve development in that table at the bottom. So this is a corrected version of the attachment, which we've provided, and that can be attached to the minutes so that when you are voting on it, you're voting on the corrected version. That number does match, reconcile with the numbers included in the proposed Schedule 9 and the following item on the agenda. So it aligns with everything else that we've provided. The correct number is 220.7 million, and it was just that the wrong number had been pasted into that cell.
Thank you.
So that's as much as we can provide, and it adds up. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've had a good old bash at this. We are attempting to protect future ratepayers, which is what our responsibility is, and that's what I think is behind this. And so I'm going to ask someone to move this, perhaps. I'll move it, seeing as it is, and Councillor Darby will second this, and we'll propose this. And we'll ask all of those who wish to vote and say aye.
No, speak and comment now.
Okay. Right, it's been proposed. We'll have comments now. That's you.
Sure, thank you very much. So I've got a significant concern that we are considering development contributions for a range of things, roading and footpaths and cycleways and reserves and facilities. And all of that infrastructure is predicated on the land being suitable and not subject to flooding. That is not the case, and at this point, we are not informed about that because the agenda item specifically mentions that stormwater hasn't been worked through. That might be okay. That might be okay if we were talking about a relatively small catchment. But we're talking about a 160-kilometre catchment that has a great deal of steep land in it. It's got a whole range of activities in terms of forestry and slash and farming and the like. That is actually aggravating as we speak in terms of contributing to stormwater. The stormwater information that the planning was based on is already well out of date and was based on climate change figures back in 2015 that were in themselves based on earlier figures. So you've got a large basin, 4 streams and tributaries, they all flow in together, they interact, they all egress through the Manukau Harbour, which is going to be subject to increasing sea level rise and storm surge. So fundamentally, the problem is that you can't build detention to get your way out of this, and we have recently experienced just that problem. So if ever there was a significant catchment in the Auckland region now that is already subjected to substantial flooding, and this flooding, as I said, in a 1 in 50-year flood, took out the motorway bridge. And that wasn't actually a bad flood. So that's what we're talking about here. And the question I put to you, councillors, is we consider storm events and we consider all sorts of green things, yet here's an issue where we should be asking substantial questions so that we are not building in areas that are going to be subjected to significant flooding. So I have a real concern that we are not appraised of this baseline information that informs all the other development contribution information. And I don't think that it's appropriate for us just to fob it off to a year or 18 months or however down the line it becomes, against a background where, as been pointed out, there are houses being built in this area now. So I have a real concern, and as a consequence I'll be voting against this item, as I have consistently over development in this area. Thank you.
Councillor Newman.
Well, just briefly, look, I support. It's very important that this is adopted because the funding does need to be got for transport, but there is a very reasonable concern being expressed by a lot of people in the community as to how the development will impact in terms of flooding in response to extreme weather. And Mr. Dunshea is right that we're not talking about the developments that are occurring in the Slippery Creek catchment, but there are 4 creeks in the area: the Slippery Creek, Hengaia, Ngakaroa, and Waihoihoi stream. And Hengaia stream, that flooded earlier this year, and it was very distressing to see the owners down at Chester's having to try and clean up an appalling flood that occurred in that business and other local businesses. It is a real concern that the area has been live zoned, but we can't stop that now. What we have to do is 15 months seems like an awful long time for an area that has been live zoned. I understand you've got to go through structure planning and consider the stormwater attenuation options, but we will need to get all of that information back, then turn it around into a further document for consultation, and then come back and have another go. And that feels like it's about 2 years away, and I'm really worried because a lot of applications for resource consent are going to be lodged between now and then. So I would ask that the officers really push for an acceleration of that work on stormwater, because the costs that we're identifying today are not the actual cost of development, and the cost that needs to be paid is actually going to be significantly higher than what is being proposed here. Thank you.
Thank you. We're not debating whether or not there should be development there. That was a resource consent that had been granted ages ago. We're debating whether or not we're going to get 30 years of return from this or 10. And so that's what this is about. That whether it's a wise place or not is a good question, but that cab left the rank some years ago. Councillor Baker.
Yeah, so look, I'm going to be voting against it, but I absolutely agree that we need to move forward on this. I'm voting against it because I'm really uncomfortable, as I said before, in some of the information. And I acknowledge the amount of work that's gone on, and a lot of it went on in the previous term, and so this has been dragging on. But I think, as Councillor Lee described, that the concerns of the developers, I don't think can be ignored, and I don't think can be dealt with today with a cut and paste error. I'm also really worried in terms of having been on the local board I guess that if you're looking at puzzles, and if you thought of Drury as a puzzle, there's a whole lot of pieces missing, and the overall outcomes and aspirations for the area, including, you know, an existing village that's got about 2,000 or 3,000 people that live there currently, and are going to have their entire commercial area pulled apart and taken away and removed, meaning those 2,000 and 3,000 people have to drive to Papakura to get their bottle of milk or whatever. There's a missing piece about what the aspirations are from the people that live there. There have been theoretical decisions made within council to determine, well, we're going to have 43 parks, and we're going to have this and we're going to have that, without any really meaningful engagement. We had a structure plan. Des Morrison fought for that structure plan in the first term of this council because we knew that there was going to be significant development in that area in Pukekohe and Pairata. So there are missing pieces. I think we simply need to get those pieces together, and we may end up in exactly the same place where we are now, but we have to, and it's the old policeman in me trying to get to that, all the information, and I am just missing bits of information. I would far prefer that we defer this, not kick it for touch, but we defer it to get more information and get more clarity and give the officers more time to be more specific in how they respond to the allegations, or not allegations, a commentary from not only Kiwi Property, but from the Property Council and who we are a member of, and so that we do provide something and we are making a fully informed decision. And so, you know, if this fails, I'd have sent a different a replacement to defer, and it doesn't have to be for too long. I mean, we talk about the worry of having to go out and consult again. I would imagine that the cost of consulting again would be far smaller than the cost of having to take significant legal action that may be well avoidable. I'm not sure, but I'll be voting against it. Thanks.
There will be a cost of delay, of course, because every time you delay, a whole lot of guys pile in to get under the current regime, and that will greatly exceed any of the other costs you're talking about. So if you are elected to make some decisions. Those of you who want to make decisions can fulfil that obligation, and those that you don't want to make decisions can just collect lunch. So that's the end of that, and we're going to go to a debate now.
I wish to speak very briefly, and I'm not going to use my speaking turn to move an amendment, and in terms of full disclosure, most of my family owned land out there. It's where I grew up. It's where a lot of my family still live. And the question for them is, does council know what it's doing? They know this land. They know this area. And there are some very significant doubts. I tried to express to the officers in my questioning that this is not an intention to be disrespectful, but we have to be able to give our communities the confidence that we do know what we're doing. We had the opportunity at the time of the unitary plan that we could have staged it, we could have demonstrated that we had all the knowledge, and then we just introduced it carefully. And I think that is really behind Councillor Baker, and I feel very sorry for him at the moment, that we've got development taking place, but this is going to allow for how this will be interpreted is, I think, going to be the measure of the competency of this council. And we're going into it in a bit of a void. So do we take a little bit of time now and get more information along those things that we do need to have? Or do we just say, oh, what the hell, you know, we've got to accommodate all this growth and we've got to do this development, and, you know, this weekend it's going to rain again. We're going to have a stream of rain and then we'll be lamenting the damage that we've done. I just feel really sad that I support development, but intelligent development. And what we're doing today seems to lack intelligence because we don't have all the information. And I can't go back to my family, my friends, and say, yep, no, we got it all, go ahead, we're feeling confident. I don't feel confident with this, I feel a bit embarrassed.
Okay, you've asked whether we know. The developers are the ones that are taking the risk. Do they know? And what this is making sure that the ratepayers don't fund a whole lot of things that will end up being paid for. Just remember, you're here for the ratepayers, and Councillor Lee is going to show
I'll be
just
brief,
how much.
Mr Mayor. I'll be brief. I'm listening with concern with the members of this governing body who have a close association with the area in question. And my doubt's really related to the sheer costs and blowout in costs that we're seeing, and our ability to manage the procurement in this project. But I'm also concerned about the strategic coherence of doing this, embarking on this, with what we know now, because another part of the council is preparing radical plans for a significant retreat from houses that are and developments in floodplains, and that's going to cost the council and I believe the government a significant amount of money. It makes sense, rather than engineering our way out of repeat floods. The council believes, Healthy Waters believes, it is smarter just to retreat those properties, many of them with resource consents for infilling, going back years, to retreat that development back out of those areas. And at the same time, from what I hear from the local members, is that we are going in at a full charge into an area which has significant risks for flooding. So I'll leave those thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is in response to the developers who are going full charge into an area. Personally, I would say that the chances of this being as big in Napier in 50 years is zero, but still they seem to think it will do. Councillor Darby, can you round this out nicely?
Yeah, look, thanks for the contributions, everybody. Look, I'm supportive of proceeding on this. We've actually socialised this pretty well. Now, I'm not sure whether everybody was around the table when we workshopped this numerous times. There's been a lot of information, a lot of questions been asked, a lot of answers, even further answers today. And there's some entries in some of the cells that are incorrect, and they'll be picked up. Councillors referred to the future development strategy review. That's referred to in the recommendations. It's all covered off. I've been around development contributions a little bit longer than maybe most, but that's because at the North Shore City Council, we embarked in this territory. We led the charge. Every time I have seen the development community come in and suggest, not quite threat, but sort of, that they'll take us all the way to the cleaners, to the highest court. And every time it does occur. But you've got to have some stomach to go through with this. And I've got the stomach, and I'm pretty sure that our ratepayers have got the stomach to make sure that everything is balanced up as it should be. Because at the moment, it's the ratepayer that is footing the bill to the extent that they should not be. That's in the next section. This is the first part of it. We've got to have the stomach to go through with this. Otherwise, we're not standing up for the many Aucklanders who are cross-subsidising development currently. So I've heard the submissions from the development community. I've read the letter earlier this week. I've heard David Schwartzfeger on behalf of Kiwi today. And I've heard our staff as well. And they have addressed those concerns. And if there are any minor errors in there, I'm sure they'll be trawling over those documents and reversing the 1 and the 2 or whatever the number is. But that's Tidy Up Act. I think we've just got to have the stomach now and proceed. This is a big move, but it is an informed move. We've considered this a number of times. This is not day one, and it's sounding like for some members this is day one.
Thank you for that. We may as well put the vote. I suppose someone will want a division here, will they? Yes, I just guessed that one. I can see the future. Will you organise a division, please, Division Colonel?
Certainly. Councillors, you are voting on item 9 as it is in front of you. Thank you. Councillor Baker. Against. Councillor Dalton.
For.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Ferry.
For.
Councillor Filipaina.
For.
Councillor Fletcher.
Abstain.
Councillor Foley.
For, reluctantly.
Councillor Henderson.
For.
Councillor Lee.
Against?
Councillor Leone.
For.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. Councillor Turner.
Against.
Councillor
No,
Walker.
I think he said abstain.
Abstain.
You said abstain? Or against? Against. Okay, well, I didn't hear you properly.
Councillor Walker. Again. Councillor Watson. Councillor Williamson.
For.
Mayor Brown.
For.
Okay, that will be carried 13 to 4 with 1 abstention.
Okay, we're going to adjourn for half an hour. I did hope to carry on because the next one is basically connected totally to this. And it would seem to me illogical if you can vote for that one that you're not going to vote for the next one. But I remain to be surprised. Thank you.